Sophia Sinclair slammed the iPad onto the marble vanity, the metal stand screeching in protest. The mirror reflected the hard line of her mouth and the fury simmering just beneath the surface of her eyes. Splashed across the screen was the lead story on TMZ, a grainy, high-contrast photo from a parking garage late last night. She was slumped against her manager, Ava Chun, her head resting wearily on Ava's shoulder as Ava's hand adjusted the collar of her trench coat. The paparazzi's predatory angle had twisted a simple act of friendly support into something salacious, something suggestive. Sapphic secret? A-lister Sophia Sinclair's late-night rendezvous with girlfriend raises eyebrows. The headline was a garish, blood-red slash across the screen. Cartier just called. They weren't happy. Ava's voice crackled through the phone speaker, rough with exhaustion. They want a public denial within 48 hours. Or, they're invoking the morality clause. And, the Sinclairs have been calling. Your mother has tried 3 times. I didn't pick up. The air in the dressing room turned thick, unbreathable. Sophia's assistant, a young woman named Mia, shrank into a corner, barely daring to breathe. Sophia closed her eyes, her fingernails digging into her palms. The cold judgment behind the flashbulbs, her family's never-ending crusade to control her life, the torrent of vile speculation now flooding Twitter. It all felt like invisible vines, tightening around her chest, choking her. She needed air. She needed out. Got it, Sophia said, her voice eerily calm. She opened her eyes, only a slight tremor in her tone betraying the turmoil inside. Tell the driver to have the Escalade ready. We're going to the set-up state. Sophia, the paparazzi are camped out everywhere. What are you going to do on set? Ava exclaimed on the other end. My job, Sophia said, standing. She pulled the clips from her hair in one fluid motion, a cascade of black silk falling over her shoulders, hiding the sudden pallor of her face. I signed a contract. I shoot the movie. The reporters? Let them get their pictures. She grabbed her sunglasses and a baseball cap, pulled open the door, and walked out. The sharp click of her heels echoed down the empty hotel corridor, a sound like a final, desperate gamble. The black Escalade fought its way through the swarm of reporters in the hotel's underground garage, the camera flashes merging into a blinding, strobing daylight. Sophia leaned against the tinted window, her eyes, hidden behind dark lenses, staring blankly at the distorted faces and ravenous cameras outside. Beside her, Ava's fingers flew across her own tablet, the screen's cold light carving deep lines into her forehead. The only way to kill this story is to feed them a bigger one. Something more, palatable to the mainstream, Ava said, her voice low and sharp. The fastest, most effective way to do that. You need a husband. A man who can appear in public, right now, and prove that your romantic life is perfectly normal. Sophia's body went rigid, but she didn't turn her head. The Sinclairs have been pressuring you to get married for years. This gives you the perfect cover. Ava continued, her tone as clinical as if she were discussing a corporate merger. We find nobody, someone with a squeaky clean background, someone controllable, tight-lipped, and not hard on the eyes. We sign him to an ironclad NDA and marriage contract. 3 years, maybe 5. Long enough for you to transition into more serious roles, stabilize your brand, and get your family off your back. Find an actor? Sophia finally asked, a trace of bitter irony in her voice. Actors are too unpredictable, too much potential for blowback. We need someone who's genuinely desperate, someone with a weakness we can leverage, who has no power to ever turn on us. Avis said, a shrewd, cold light in her eyes. Someone like that will do exactly as they're told. Sophia said nothing more. The city blurred past the window, a smear of gray and concrete. Find a man, sign a cold-blooded contract, and lock herself in another gilded cage of her own design? The irony was suffocating. But with the wolves of the press at the door and the weight of her family about to come crashing down, she had no other move to make. The film's setup state was a dusty, chaotic mess. It was a low-budget indie fantasy flick, and Sophia was doing a 2-day cameo as a mysterious warrior queen as a favor to the director. She changed into her costume and sat in a flimsy pop-up tent, trying to force the noise from her head and find her character. The shouts of the crew, the director's commands, the murmur of extras. It all blended with the smell of cheap coffee and sweat into the unique, gritty symphony of a film set. A fight scene was being filmed nearby. The actor playing the villain was clumsy, and the stunt double taking the hits for him was being thrown to the ground, hard, over and over again. Sophia's gaze drifted to that corner of the set. The stuntman was young, dressed in the same ragged costume as the villain, his face obscured by a thick layer of stage blood and grime. He was thrown, kicked, and slammed onto the thin mat. Then he would silently climb to his feet, reset his position, and wait for the next blow. No complaints, no expression. Just his eyes. Beneath the dirt and fake blood, they were unnervingly still. Not numb, but filled with an almost obsessive focus and a quiet, brutal resilience. Cut. What the hell was that, stunt guy? You landed wrong. Again, the director yelled, his patience frayed. The stuntman wiped the fake blood from his eyes and muttered a low, "Yes, sir." The words were faint, but they carried through the noise with an unshakable calm. Sophia picked up her water bottle, her fingertips cold. She watched the young man get thrown again, his body hitting the mat with a sickening thud before he scrambled back up. Those quiet eyes were like a stone dropped into the stagnant pool of her mind, sending out strange ripples. "Sophia, you're up next," Mia called, jogging over. Sophia took a deep breath and walked toward the set. She had to focus to get this scene right. It was the only real thing she could hold on to right now. The part of her that was just an actor named Sophia Sinclair. The scene went smoothly enough. After the director yelled, "Cut," Sophia let out a sigh of relief and headed back to her tent, flanked by her assistant. As they reached a narrow walkway cordoned off by canvas tarps, chaos erupted. A man in a gray hoodie and a surgical mask burst from behind a stack of prop crates. In his hand, he held an open plastic water bottle filled with a cloudy, foul-smelling liquid, and he lunged straight for Sophia, screaming, "Liar! Freak! Go to hell!" Mia's shriek ripped through the air. It happened in a split second. Sophia's pupils contracted in terror, her body frozen, unable to react. Her security detail, caught off guard by a sudden surge of fans asking for autographs, was a fatal half-second too slow. The cloudy liquid was about to hit Sophia's face. A figure, fast as a striking panther, launched itself from behind her. Not a bodyguard, it was the stuntman. With explosive force, he threw himself between Sophia and her attacker, raising his left arm. The thick sleeve of his costume intercepted the bottle's trajectory. Splash! Most of the liquid arced sideways, hitting the canvas tarp. It hissed on contact, tiny white bubbles fizzing as a pungent, acidic smell filled the air. "It's acid!" someone screamed in terror. The attacker, enraged, pulled a small folding knife from his pocket and lunged again, waving it wildly. "I'll ruin that face. See who wants you then." The stuntman's eyes flashed with cold fury. There were no wasted movements. As the knife came at him, he sidestepped, his hand clamping down on the attacker's wrist in a vice grip. A swift twist, a sharp downward pressure. A sickening crack echoed over the attacker's scream of agony, and the knife clattered to the ground. The stuntman followed through with a shoulder check that sent the man flying backward like a sack of garbage. The entire confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. By the time security finally broke free and swarmed the scene, the attacker was neutralized, writhing on the ground. The set descended into pandemonium. Sophia stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs, a cold sweat drenching her back. She could still feel the phantom heat where the liquid had flown past her arm. Her terrified gaze lifted to the man standing in front of her. The young stuntman had released the attacker and was catching his breath. His back was to her, his broad shoulders tense beneath the cheap fabric. The sleeve he'd used to block the acid was riddled with smoking holes, revealing angry red skin beneath. He glanced at his arm, not even flinching before turning around. The fake blood and dirt still covered most of his face, but his eyes were clear, calm, sharp, like cold steel forged in fire. He looked at Sophia, his gaze sweeping over her face to confirm she was unharmed, before he spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it cut through the surrounding chaos. "You're okay." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. delivered with a steadiness that was beyond his years, and a power that was strangely reassuring. Security finally had the situation under control, dragging the attacker away. The frantic set manager ran over, babbling apologies. Ava, breathless, finally pushed through the crowd and grabbed Sophia's arm, checking her from head to toe. "Sophia, are you hurt? Oh my God, I almost had a heart attack." Sophia shook her head, her eyes still locked on the stuntman, who had quietly retreated to the sidelines. He was bending down to pick up a dropped prop, as if the life-or-death struggle had been just another part of his job. The smoking holes in his sleeve were a glaring reminder of what could have happened. "That man," Sophia gestured toward him, asking the set manager, "What's his name?" The manager glanced over. "Oh, him? That's Jack Wilder. New stunt guy. Good hands, quiet, tough as nails. Just hasn't had a lucky break." Jack Wilder. Sophia repeated the name under her breath. The chaotic set, the acrid smell, the panicked chatter around her, it all seemed to recede, as if behind a pane of frosted glass. She watched the young man silently brushing dust from his costume, trying to pull the ruined sleeve down over his burned arm. Those calm eyes wouldn't leave her mind. Ava was still talking, a frantic stream of words about crisis PR and beefing up security, but Sophia didn't hear a word. An idea, cold, pragmatic, and born of sheer desperation, was taking root in her mind, growing with terrifying speed, overwhelming everything else. She needed a husband, someone with a clean background, someone controllable, someone who could solve problems, and when it mattered most, someone who could stand in front of her. Sophia's gaze locked onto Jack Wilder again. He had pulled his grimy hood back up, once again becoming an anonymous figure in the background. But the lightning-fast motion as he blocked the acid, the brutal efficiency with which he took down her attacker, and those eyes, as deep and steady as a quarry lake in the midst of chaos, they were burned into her memory. "Ava," Sophia said, cutting her off. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but held a note of absolute finality. "That plane you mentioned. Get it ready." Ava paused, then understood. Her expression sharpened. "You have a candidate?" Sophia didn't answer. She just lifted her chin, giving the slightest, almost imperceptible nod in Jack Wilder's direction. Ava's eyes followed her gaze and landed on the silent stuntman. Her brow furrowed in doubt and appraisal. A bottom-rung stuntman? This was a far cry from the manageable but presentable professional she had envisioned. But the unshakable resolve in Sophia's eyes stopped the protest on her lips. She took another, closer look at the man named Jack Wilder. His skills were undeniable, his background was probably clean enough to be scraped to the bone. And as for control, Sophia turned and walked back toward her chair. Her heels made a steady, deliberate sound on the dusty concrete floor. The storm of scandal was still swirling. The shadow of her family was ever present, but a cold, brutally efficient solution was beginning to take shape. The cost? She refused to think about that right now. All she knew was that in that terrifying, life-altering moment, she understood with blinding clarity that she needed a shield, a blade, a tool to help her break out of the cage closing in around her. And Jack Wilder, the silent stuntman who took the hits and had the eyes of survivors, seemed perfect. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### VIP garage of a top-tier Park Avenue condo, sealing them off from any prying eyes. Sophia got out first, her heels clicking on the polished concrete. Without a backward glance, she walked toward the private elevator. Ava followed, a thick manila folder clutched in her hand. Jack Wilder trailed behind them, still wearing his dusty, blood-stained costume from the set. He was a jarring anomaly in this world of expensive leather and subtle, custom-blended air fresheners. He moved with a quiet economy, a weightless shadow. The elevator ascended in silence. The air was thick with unspoken tension. In the mirrored walls, Sophia could see Jack's reflection. His eyes were downcast, traces of grime still streaking his jawline. The sharp, coiled intensity he'd shown on set seemed to have been put away, leaving behind an almost indifferent calm. The doors slid open silently, revealing a foyer the size of a small apartment. "Wait here," Sophia said, dropping the words behind her as she headed toward the master suite. Ava gestured for Jack to sit on the bench by the door, then hurried after Sophia. Inside the massive bedroom suite, Sophia shrugged off her coat and rubbed her temples. Ava closed the heavy, soundproof door and placed a folder on the vanity. "I have his file. It's clean," Ava said, her words clipped and efficient. Jack Wilder, 22. From some forgotten hollow in Appalachia. Parents died when he was young, raised by his grandfather. 3 months ago, the grandfather was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. Surgery and treatment will run at least $150,000. Jack dropped out of high school to work, been doing extra work and stunts on non-union sets ever since. No agent, no contracts. His background is a blank slate. He currently owes about $15,000 to a couple of payday lenders and a guy from his hometown, all for the medical bills. I have the records of the collection calls right here. She tapped the folder. Sophia picked it up, feeling its weight without opening it. A young man pushed to the brink by crippling debt. Clean, vulnerable, desperate for cash. He was the perfect candidate. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the glittering expanse of the city at night. The terrifying scene from the film's set and those steady eyes swirled together with the cold, hard facts in the folder. "Bring him in," Sophia said, turning around, her voice flat. Jack was led into the living room. The light from the enormous crystal chandelier was bright but cold, glinting off the Italian leather sofas and marble floors. He stood just inside the room, his muddy sneakers a stark contrast to the plush, cream-colored rug beneath them. Sophia sat on the main sofa, her posture elegant and remote. Ava stood beside her, a sentry at the ready. "Mr. Wilder," Ava began, her tone formal, "we'd like to thank you for your assistance on set today. Ms. Sinclair is very grateful, and we have a job offer for you." Jack raised his eyes, his gaze landing calmly on Sophia. She met head-on. In the bright light, his eyes seemed even deeper, like bottomless pools, revealing nothing. Ava pulled 2 bound documents from the folder and slid them across the coffee table. "This is a non-disclosure agreement, the highest level. Once you sign it, everything you see, hear, or experience in this apartment stays with you for life. If you breathe a word of it, the consequences will be something you cannot possibly handle." Her tone was a clear warning. Jack stepped forward and picked up the NDA. He turned the pages slowly but deliberately, his eyes scanning the draconian clauses. When he finished, he didn't speak. He just nodded once, picked up the pen, and signed his name on the indicated line. The signature was clear and strong. Ava took the signed NDA and pushed the second, much thicker document toward him. "This is the primary contract. Ms. Sinclair requires a husband, in name only, for a term of 3 years. You will be expected to play this role at necessary functions, primarily for her family. In public, you will be her shadow. Your job is to handle her personal security on the periphery, deal with stalkers, block cameras, and neutralize any unwanted contact. Exactly like you did on set today." Jack picked up the contract. The cover was blank except for the sterile word agreement. He opened it and began to read. The terms were brutal. 1. Absolute compliance. During the term of the contract, the second party, Jack Wilder, must unconditionally follow all reasonable directives from the first party, Sophia Sinclair, and her designated representative, Ava Chun. 2. Total discretion. The existence and contents of this agreement must not be disclosed to any third party in any form. No details of the relationship with the first party may be revealed. 3. Positional constraints. The second party's role is that of a dependent spouse. In the presence of the first party's family, a compliant and deferential demeanor is required. In public, the second party must remain low profile and invisible, initiating no physical contact or attention-drawing interactions with the first party. 4. Prohibitions. During the term of the contract, the second party is prohibited from engaging in any romantic or sexual relationships and from any behavior that could potentially damage the first party's reputation. 5. Living arrangements. The second party will reside in the staff quarters of the first party's designated residence, this apartment. Entry into the first party's private areas, master suite, office, etc., is forbidden without explicit permission. 6. Compensation. The first party will make a one-time, upfront payment of $250,000, $250,000. 0-0 to the second party. Upon successful completion of the 3-year term without major breach of contract, a final payment of $500,000, $500, 000 will be made. Early termination or significant breach by the second party will result in a penalty requiring repayment of 10 times the advance. 7. Termination clause. Only the first party holds the right to unilateral, unconditional termination of this contract. Jack's eyes lingered for a moment on the numbers. His hand was steady as he turned the page, his face impassive, as if he were reading an appliance manual, not selling his life. When he got to the clause prohibiting romantic relationships, his gaze paused for a fraction of a second before moving on. Any questions? Ava asked, her eyes sharp. Jack put the contract down and looked at Sophia. The advance. When does it clear? His voice was quiet, cutting straight to the point. Sophia took a sip of water, the crystal glass cold against her fingertips. She looked at this young man, who only cared about the money. It extinguished the last flicker of gratitude she felt for him saving her life. Sign it. Provide your thumbprint and banking details. It will be wired within 24 hours, she replied, her voice just as cold. Jack nodded. Without a second glance at the harsh terms, he picked up the pen and signed his name again. Then he pressed his thumb onto the ink pad and stamped a firm, red print next to his signature, a bloody seal on a life sold. Excellent, Ava said, collecting the contract with a satisfied, business-like air. Your room is down that hall. She pointed to a narrow corridor ending in a small, plain door. It has a private bathroom. Basic necessities are provided. Remember, that is your designated area. Do not disturb Ms. Sinclair without permission. I'll have someone bring you some suitable clothes tomorrow. For now, go get cleaned up. Jack glanced at the closed door, asked no questions, picked up his worn canvas backpack, and walked toward it. The door opened and closed, and he was gone. The living room was silent again. Sophia. Ava said, her voice low, this guy, he's too calm. Faced with that contract and that kind of money, he didn't even blink. It's not normal. Either he's dangerously cunning, or he's so far past the edge that nothing matters anymore. I can handle the latter, but the former. I'm worried we're bringing a wolf into the fold. Sophia stood and walked to the window. The city lights below were brilliant, but cold. He needs the money to save a life, she said softly, stating a fact. We have the contract, and we have his grandfather. As long as the money is there, he's the safest weapon we could ask for. She remembered the way he'd blocked the acid without a thought, the brutality in his movements as he disarmed her attacker. He can solve my problems. That's enough. As for the rest of it, she paused, her voice laced with weary indifference. A tool doesn't need to have thoughts. Ava sighed. I hope you're right. The Sinclairs called again. Your grandmother wants to know when you're bringing your young man to Greenwich for inspection. You can't avoid it. Sophia's eyes turned to ice. I know. I'll arrange it. For the next few days, Jack Wilder's presence was like a new piece of silent, efficient furniture. He followed the contract to the letter. When Sophia woke up, the kitchen and living room were always spotless. When she left, he would appear at the elevator, a silent shadow 3 paces behind her. He wore the plain black casuals Ava had sent over, the clean lines of the clothes accentuating his lean, powerful build. With the grime washed away, his features were strong and well-defined, with a hard-edged handsomeness. But his eyes remained unervingly quiet, making him impossible to read. Sophia attended a promotional event for a luxury brand. Afterward, she had to sign autographs for a small group of fans. The crowd surged forward, and the security guards struggled to maintain the line. A tall, heavy-set male fan broke through and lunged towards Sophia, thrusting out his hand to grab her arm. Sophia, sign for me. Sign it right here, he yelled, pointing at his own chest. The crowd gasped. Security moved to intercept, but they were too late. The man's sweaty, frantic hand was inches from her arm. A black-clad figure moved like lightning. Jack, who had been standing invisibly at the edge of the security line, was suddenly right beside her. He cleanly blocked the man's arm, the movement casual, but the force enough to send the fan stumbling back. Jack's body then formed a subtle, solid barrier, shielding Sophia from the press of the crowd. He said nothing, simply stood there, an impassable human wall. "Who the hell are you?" the fan shouted, furious. Jack ignored him, his calm gaze sweeping the crowd with an unspoken authority that made the fan shrink back. Security finally arrived and removed the man. Sophia hadn't even seen Jack move. The feeling of imminent, unwanted contact had just vanished. Looking up, she saw only the hard line of his jaw and the breadth of his back. He performed his duties as her invisible shield with a chilling, machine-like efficiency. Back at the apartment, Sophia was heading upstairs when she passed the staff quarters. The door was slightly ajar. She glanced inside. The room was tiny, barely large enough for a single bed and a narrow wardrobe. Jack stood with his back to the door, carefully hanging a black shirt in the closet. His movements were meticulous. He seemed to sense her presence, his motion pausing for a fraction of a second, but he didn't turn around. Sophia looked away and continued up the stairs. The cold marble steps reflected the light of the chandelier above. A stuntman who took beatings for a living, who had signed his life away for his grandfather's medical bills. A kept husband who silently organized his cheap clothes in a tiny room. An invisible bodyguard who neutralized threats with brutal precision. The images collided in her mind. A tool, she reminded herself again. A useful, silent, and securely shackled tool. She needed him to solve her problems and handle her family. Nothing more. As for those quiet eyes that sometimes made her forget to breathe, Sophia reached the top of the stairs and pushed open the door to her suite. The heavy wood swung shut, sealing off the world of that small room below. She needed to rest. Tomorrow, she had a bigger battle to fight. The Sinclair family's inspection was waiting, a guillotine hanging over her head, and she would need Jack to play the part of the meek, compliant husband perfectly. #3. Cracks in the armor, an unexpected guardian. The black Maybach glided through the guarded gates of a private enclave in Greenwich, Connecticut. Manicured lawns and ornate fountains slid past the windows, the air thick with the cold, sterile odor that only old money can buy. Sophia leaned back, her eyes closed, her fingers twisting the chain of her Hermes handbag. The car's opulent interior, meant to be comforting, felt suffocating. Jack sat on the jump seat opposite her. He wore a dark gray suit Ava had provided, the fine tailoring lending him a polished, understated authority that disguised the roughness of stuntman. He looked out the window, his profile sharp in the soft interior light. His expression was placid, but his eyes seemed to hold a deeper, more focused stillness than usual. "Remember," Sophia said without opening her eyes, her voice tight, "you'll be meeting my grandmother, my mother, and my uncle's family. Answer their questions directly. Be respectful, but don't grovel. Say as little as possible, and under no circumstances do you mention your real background. For everything else, follow my lead." "Understood." Jack's low, even voice came from across the car. The Maybach pulled up to a sprawling, French chateau-style mansion. A uniformed butler was already waiting. Sophia took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Her heels clicked on the marble steps, a sharp, lonely sound. Jack followed, half a step behind her, a silent shadow. In the cavernous living room, the light from a massive crystal chandelier was almost blinding. On a set of leather Chesterfield sofas sat the family. In the center was a silver-haired woman in a Chanel suit, her eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Eleanor Sinclair, the family matriarch. Beside her was Sophia's mother, Susan, her face a mask of polite, distant elegance. On the other side were Sophia's uncle, Robert, his wife, Beatrice, and their twin daughters, who were dressed like porcelain dolls. "Grandmother, mother, Uncle Robert, Aunt Beatrice," Sophia said, her face fixed in a flawless smile as she approached. Jack was right behind her. Every eye in the room swiveled and locked onto him. The scrutiny was overt, appraising, and utterly dismissive. The air grew heavy. "So this is the one you've chosen," Eleanor Sinclair said, her voice quiet but heavy with authority. Her eyes raked over Jack, as if he were a piece of livestock. She did not invite them to sit. Jack kept his eyes slightly lowered, his posture deferential but not subservient. "Grandmother, this is Jack Wilder," Sophia said. "Jack, this is my grandmother, my mother, and my aunt and uncle." "Mrs. Sinclair." "Ma'am." "Mr. Sinclair, Mrs. Sinclair," Jack said, his voice steady as he addressed each of them in turn. Wilder. Robert adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, his eyes gleaming with condescending curiosity. An interesting name. And what is it you do, Mr. Wilder? What about your family? A Sinclair woman can't just associate with. Uncle Robert, Sophia cut in, her smile unwavering but her tone gaining a razor's edge. Jack helps me manage some of my private investments. As for his family, he's been on his own for a long time. She deftly sidestepped the landmines. Private investments? Beatrice tittered behind her hand, her surprise theatrical. Why? Sophia is a major star now, dealing with 8-figure projects. For you to be handling her portfolio at your age, Mr. Wilder, you must be a prodigy. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Jack met Beatrice's gaze calmly. You're too kind, Mrs. Sinclair. I mostly just listen and learn from Sophia. His answer was perfect. It deflected, credited Sophia, and adopted a humble posture without sounding weak. Eleanor Sinclair remained silent, her sharp eyes fixed on Jack. She noted that faced with her son's pointed, malicious questioning, the young man showed no sign of anger or panic. Only that unnerving calm, a calm that bespoke either profound stupidity or unbreakable will. Sit, the matriarch finally commanded. A maid showed them to a smaller sofa. One of the twins, a girl of about 15, pointed at Jack and giggled. Sophia, your husband is handsome, but he's like a wooden doll. Has he ever seen a house this big before? Do we scare him? The comment, cloaked in childish innocence, was a poison dart. The room's atmosphere grew even colder. Susan frowned, about to scold her niece, but Beatrice silenced her with a look. Sophia's hand tightened around her teacup, her knuckles turning white. She was about to speak, but Jack moved first. He looked at the girl, his expression neutral. The house is very large and very beautiful, he said calmly. His gaze shifted to the massive windows overlooking the gardens. And the roses in the garden are lovely. They look like David Austin's. A Juliet, perhaps? It takes a very skilled gardener to get them to bloom like that this time of year. His delivery was matter-of-fact, but he had just named the most expensive and difficult-to-cultivate rose in the garden. The girl stared, speechless. Even Eleanor's eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. Robert immediately pounced. Oh, you know about horticulture, Mr. Wilder? A little, Jack replied, his gaze returning to Robert. I did some part-time work at a botanical garden once. Picked up a few things. Nothing like a professional. He admitted to part-time work, so naturally that it took the sting out of Robert's intended follow-up insults. A tense lunch passed in a silent war of attrition. Afterward, Eleanor summoned Sophia to the study alone. Jack was left in the living room to be entertained by Robert and Beatrice, which meant being subjected to more invasive questions about his finances and connections. When Sophia emerged from the study, she was paler than before. She saw Jack sitting quietly in a corner armchair, with Robert perched opposite him, still trying to pry information out of him. Jack's answers remained brief and vague, his polite deference a kind of invisible wall that Robert couldn't penetrate. We're leaving, Sophia announced, her voice filled with exhaustion and relief. The ride back was even more silent than the trip there. Sophia leaned against the window, her eyes closed, a weary tension in her brow. She hadn't expected Jack to handle them so well. His quiet, unshakable demeanor had somehow neutralized her uncle's viciousness. It was more than she'd expected from a tool. Thank you. For today, she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's gaze shifted from the window to her pale profile. It's my job. A few days later, a top international jewelry brand held its new collection launch at a downtown art gallery. As the brand ambassador, Sophia was the main event. She walked the red carpet in a glittering silver gown, a priceless diamond necklace at her throat, the cameras flashing like a man-made thunderstorm. Jack, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, was a shadow at the edge of the security line, his eyes scanning the frenzied crowd. He maintained a careful 20-foot distance, the designated boundary for her invisible man. As Sophia approached the entrance, where a short flight of stairs led into the gallery, the crowd of media and fans grew thicker, their phones practically touching her face. Just as she placed her foot on the third step, a man in a waiter's uniform and a mask burst from the media scrum. He was holding a small, dark glass bottle, and with a vicious flick of his wrist, he flung its contents toward her. "Look out!" someone screamed. Sophia turned in horror, seeing only a dark spray of liquid coming at her. She tried to step back, but the heel of her shoe caught in the carpet, and she lost her balance. In that split second, a black shadow moved with impossible speed. It was Jack. Ignoring the invisible boundary, he covered the distance in 2 bounds. He threw his body in front of hers, shielding her completely with his back as he simultaneously swung his right arm out, his hand striking the attacker's wrist with brutal force. Crash! The bottle flew from the man's hand and shattered against a marble pillar. The remaining liquid sizzled, a plume of white smoke rising from the stone. The attacker screamed in pain. Jack, holding Sophia, stumbled forward from the momentum, taking the brunt of the acid splash directly on his back. A muffled grunt escaped his lips, but his arms only tightened around her, spinning her away from the danger. The acrid smell filled the air. Sophia was pressed against his chest, her cheek against the cool fabric of his suit. She could feel the violent thud of his heart, the way the muscles in his back had seized upon impact. "Get him!" security guards yelled, finally tackling the attacker. Once the threat was neutralized, Jack slowly released her. He took a step back, his brow furrowed, beads of sweat on his forehead. "Are you all right?" Sophia asked, her voice shaking as her eyes locked on his back. The dark fabric of his suit was soaked, and the edges of the wet patch were smoking. "I'm fine," Jack said, his voice raspy. He tried to straighten up, but a sharp intake of breath betrayed his pain. Ava and the bodyguard swarmed them. "Sophia, are you hurt?" Ava cried, her face white. Sophia shook her head, her gaze fixed on Jack's back. "It's acid. Someone call an ambulance." "No need," Jack said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The suit is thick. It didn't get through to the skin. Just a minor burn. I'll go to an urgent care." He shrugged off the ruined jacket. The white shirt beneath was stained a sickening yellow-brown where the acid had eaten through, the fabric scorched and curling at the edges. Sophia could see the angry red of burned skin through the ruined shirt. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. In that moment of terror, he had used his own body as a shield without a second's hesitation. The cold, contractual words, "It's my job," now felt impossibly heavy. Amid the chaos, Jack was hustled toward the car. Sophia followed close behind, the glittering gala and her designer gown fading into an irrelevant backdrop. She watched his back, still held ramrod straight despite the obvious pain. The man who had calmly faced down her family, the stuntman who silently took beatings, the kept husband in the tiny staff room. All those images shattered. Could a cold contract really contain an instinct like that? ####4. A dangerous chemistry, a career reborn. The air in the private hospital room was sterile and silent. Sophia sat on a sofa against the far wall, watching as a nurse carefully cut away the back of Jack's shirt. The fabric, stuck to his skin, peeled away to reveal an ugly, reddish-brown, chemical burn just below his shoulder blade. The edges were blistered, the center a deeper, angrier color. As the nurse irrigated the wound with saline, Jack's back muscles clenched, the veins in his arms standing out in sharp relief. He bit down hard, a low grunt his only concession to the pain. Sophia's hands, resting in her lap, twisted the fabric of her gown. The scent of the gala still clung to her, a jarring contrast to the scene before her. The acrid smell of the acid seemed to linger in the air, a ghost of the terror she'd felt and the warmth of the body that had shielded her. "He was lucky," the doctor said after examining the wound. "The suit jacket and shirt absorbed most of it. It's a second-degree burn, but manageable. We'll need to change the dressing daily. No water, no strenuous activity for 2 weeks. It will scar, but we can look at cosmetic treatments later." "Thank you, doctor," Jack said, his voice hoarse. As the nurse applied a soothing salve and began to bandage the wound, Jack's body shuddered again. Sophia stood, walked to the other side of the bed, and poured a glass of water, holding out to him. He looked up, surprised. "Drink," she said, her voice even, though her fingers were clenched tight around the glass. He took it silently and drained it. The water seemed to ease some of the tension in his shoulders. Once the nurse left, the silence in the room became heavy. Sophia looked at the stark white bandage on his back, a brand mark of his sacrifice. "What?" she asked suddenly. "The contract only requires you to handle peripheral threats. Security would have gotten to him." She was asking about the instinct that had made him throw himself in front of her, an act that went far beyond the duties of a contractual tool. Jack set the empty glass on the nightstand, the movement pulling at his injury. He winced. "Didn't have time to think," he said. He didn't have time to think about the contract, about the consequences. His body had simply reacted. Sophia understood. She didn't press further, her gaze lingering on his stoic face. "You'll stay here for a few days," she announced, turning toward the door. "Ava will arrange for a private nurse. Don't come back to the apartment until you're healed." "I don't need a nurse," his voice came from behind her. "I can manage." Sophia paused at the door, her back to him. "Fine." She pulled it open and left, the closing door sealing off the smell of antiseptic and the silent man inside. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophia threw herself into prep for her next film, a massive action thriller called The Ghost Line. She was playing a brilliant but morally gray intelligence analyst who was also a lethal hand-to-hand combatant. The director, David Chun, was notorious for his brutal commitment to realism. The fight choreographer's initial designs were flashy and acrobatic, but Sophia felt they were wrong for the character. They lacked the gritty, desperate efficiency of someone who fought to survive. After one grueling session, Sophia sat on the training mat, wiping sweat from her brow. Ava came over, tablet in hand. "Chun isn't happy with the choreography. The studio's getting anxious." Sophia didn't reply, her gaze drifting to a corner of the gym. Jack was there, the bandage on his back now replaced by a large gauze dressing hidden under a loose-fitting t-shirt. He was watching playback of her training session on an iPad, his brow furrowed in concentration. On an impulse she didn't understand, Sophia grabbed her towel and a water bottle and walked over, sitting on the mat beside him. He looked up. "What do you think of the choreography?" she asked, handing him the water. He took it but didn't drink, his eyes returning to the screen. He replayed a clip of her sparring with another stuntman. "It's for show," he said flatly. The assistant choreographer, who was walking by, overheard and scowled. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Jack pointed to the screen. "That high kick is aimed at the head. The wind-up is too long. It's easy to block or grab. Following it with a spinning kick when you're already off balance is a huge mistake. A real fighter would just sweep your leg." He switched to the choreographer's previous animation. "This 3-move combo is pretty, but it's inefficient. In a real fight, you want to neutralize the threat or escape. Your character is an analyst, not a martial arts champion. Her fighting style should be more practical, simple, effective, with a kind of desperate brutality." The assistant choreographer's scowl had been replaced by a look of stunned surprise. Sophia looked from the screen to Jack's focused expression. When he talked about this, his eyes held a light she'd never seen before. "How would you change it?" she asked. Jack took the iPad and sketched out a few stick figures. "Instead of a high kick, a low side kick to the back of the knee to break their balance," he explained. "When they stumble, you don't spin. You close the distance and use an elbow strike to the throat or temple." He drew a few more lines. "If they block the kick, you drop into a leg sweep and transition to a ground choke. The whole thing should take 3 seconds. It's about destabilization and targeting vital points." The sequence he drew was brutally efficient, perfectly embodying the desperate survival instincts of her character. The next day, Sophia took Jack's revised concepts to David Chun. Chun, a grizzled veteran director, looked at the storyboard, his eyes lighting up. "Whose idea was this?" he demanded, his voice booming with excitement. "A new member of my team," Sophia said carefully. "He has relevant experience. Get him in here. I want him on the stunt team tomorrow." Chun declared, "This is the kind of raw, vicious energy the film needs." Jack was quietly added to the film's stunt team. When he first walked into the training gym, the other stunt professionals watched him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. When the lead choreographer demonstrated a sequence, Chun pointed to Jack. "Wilder, your thoughts?" Jack walked to the center of the mat. He asked one of the stuntmen to repeat a takedown move. Halfway through the motion, Jack moved like a viper, his left hand deflecting the man's arm while his right hand, shaped into a knife edge, sliced toward the man's neck, stopping a hair's breadth from his carotid artery. The move was lightning fast, precise, and lethal. Like that, Jack said. The original move telegraphs the intent. This way, you parry and strike simultaneously. It's faster. The gym was silent. Chen's face broke into a grin. Perfect. You, he said, pointing at Jack. You're in charge of all of Sophia's fight sequences, and you'll be her primary stunt double. From that day on, Jack became a quiet authority on set. Training with him was different. His moves were brutally simple, but demanded incredible precision and explosive power. His instructions were sparse and direct. Angle 3 degrees lower. Power comes from your core, not your legs. Eyes up. You fight like you mean to kill. When her form was off, he would physically adjust her posture. His calloused fingers would grip her wrist or steady her hips. The warmth of his hand a solid, grounding presence through her thin, training clothes. His proximity was brief, professional, yet it left a strange, lingering heat that made her pulse quicken. During a complicated wirework stunt, Sophia lost her balance on a landing and started to fall. Jack moved in a blur, his arm shooting out to catch her, pulling her securely against his chest. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her back. You lost your breath, he said, his voice a low rumble just above her ear. Hold on a landing. Core, tight. Sophia, enveloped in the clean scent of his sweat and the faint smell of antiseptic from his healing wound, quickly pushed herself upright. Got it, she said, her face impassive, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Jack stepped back, his gaze lingering for a second on the tips of her ears before becoming impassive once more. Again, as the weeks went by, Sophia would find herself watching him. She saw him deep in discussion with David Chun, his focused intensity earning the director's clear respect. The man who had been a silent, kept husband and an invisible shadow was now, in his own element, radiating a quiet, undeniable brilliance. A secret, unacknowledged dependence began to grow within her. After nailing a difficult sequence, her eyes would instinctively seek him out at the edge of the mat, and she would always find him watching her. In his gaze, she saw something new, not just the assessment of a professional, but something that looked like admiration. Sophia would quickly look away, crushing the strange feeling. He was a tool, she reminded herself, just a very, very effective one. ####5. The contract ticks down, a star is born. The final explosion sequence of the Ghost Line wrapped at a derelict factory on the city's outskirts. Behind the monitors, director David Chun watched until the last frame, then leaped to his feet, applauding. That's a wrap. The exhausted crew erupted in cheers. Sophia stood in the middle of the debris-strewn set, the grime of the final scene still on her face, feeling a mixture of relief and a strange emptiness. Her eyes scanned the celebrating crowd, searching, until they found him. Jack was talking quietly with one of the stunt coordinators, a walkie-talkie in his hand. He wore the standard-issue black crew jacket, but even in that, he stood out. He seemed to sense her gaze and looked up. Across the cheering chaos, their eyes met. He gave her a small, respectful nod, then turned back to his conversation. The quiet authority he now commanded had completely eclipsed the man she'd once thought of as a mere tool. At the wrap party, Sophia, as the star, was the center of attention. She moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, her smile perfect, her eyes distant. They kept drifting to a quiet corner where Jack sat alone, nursing a glass of water. A few of the younger actresses tried to talk to him, but he responded with polite brevity, his quiet forming an invisible barrier. Ava appeared at her side. David Chun can't stop talking about him, she murmured. Says he's a once-in-a-generation talent. He mentioned that a friend of his is a casting director for Cinderfall, the huge new Hollywood blockbuster. They're looking for an Asian actor to play a key role, an assassin. Real martial arts skills required. Chun wants to recommend Jack. Sophia's fingers tightened on her champagne flute. Hollywood, Cinderfall, a blockbuster. Words that could catapult a stuntman from obscurity to global fame. She looked at Jack's calm profile and felt a complex wave of emotion. pride, surprise, and a sharp, unfamiliar pang of loss. "It's a great opportunity," Sophia said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's his life, his decision." A few days later, Jack requested a week off. The reason, an audition. The location, Los Angeles. Sophia was in her penthouse, working. Her assistant, Mia, was reviewing her schedule. "Sophia, you have the Vogue cover shoot at 3 and the brand dinner at 7. Jack's flight is at 11. Ava already sent a car for him." Sophia's fingers paused on the keyboard. "Okay," she said, not looking up. "Aren't you going to see him off?" Mia asked tentatively. "He knows his job," Sophia said, her tone cutting off further discussion. The apartment was silent again. Sophia stared at the screen, unable to read the words. An unfamiliar emptiness washed over her, more unsettling than the day she'd signed that cold contract. She had grown used to his silent presence 3 paces behind her, a steady barrier against the world. Now that barrier was gone. The week stretched on. Sophia worked, smiled for the cameras, and was the epitome of a superstar. But in the quiet moments, her fingers would find their way to her phone, typing Cinderfall audition and Jack Wilder into the search bar. On the 3rd day, a well-known industry insider tweeted, "Scoop, the role of Ghost in Cinderfall has been cast. Sources say it's a newcomer from China with a serious martial arts background." Blew everyone away at the audition. The tweet included a grainy paparazzi shot of a man's back at LAX. It was unmistakably Jack. The news exploded. Variety and The Hollywood Reporter picked it up. Mysterious stuntman Jack Wilder lands coveted Hollywood role. From Bodyguard to breakout star, Mia burst into Sophia's dressing room, phone in hand. "Sophia, look, it's Jack. He got it." Sophia took the phone. She stared at the blurry photo of his back. Her heart gave a strange, heavy thump. She handed the phone back to Mia. "I see. Let's get ready for the next shot." Under the hot lights, she tried to focus, but her mind was a flood of images. Jack taking a beating on that dusty film set. Jack calmly facing down her uncle. Jack's back, shielding her from acid. Jack's hand, steadying her in the training gym. He wasn't just a stuntman she'd given chance. He had seized an opportunity that would change his life forever. The 3-year contract, with less than half its term remaining, suddenly felt flimsy. He had signed it for money, but now he had the world at his feet. Would he still need her? Would he come back? A clear, sharp panic, mingled with a bewildering sense of pride, churned inside her. The man she had bought as a tool had, without her noticing, broken through her defenses. And now, as he was poised to take flight, she felt a terrifying loss of control. That night, the apartment felt vast and empty. The staff quarters, visible down the hall, were dark and silent. All traces of him were gone. Only the cold contract remained, locked away in her safe, a silent reminder of the time ticking down. Standing in the silent living room, Sophia was struck by a terrifying realization. She had gotten used to him, and the thought of him being gone for good left a gaping hole where her formidable armor used to be. The ballroom was a sea of flashing lights. Sophia, draped in a magnificent Valentino gown of midnight blue, ascended the stage to a thunderous ovation. In her hand was the heavy, golden statuette for Best Actress. "Congratulations, Sophia Sinclair," the host's voice boomed. She held the award aloft, her smile dazzling, her acceptance speech flawless. She thanked her director, the crew, her fans. But her eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching the shadows, the spaces between the glittering tables. Where is he? Jack wasn't on the guest list. Ava had confirmed he was still in L. Yet a baseless, irrational instinct kept her looking for him. "And finally," she said, her voice catching for a fraction of a second, "I want to thank everyone who, in the darkest moments, gave me strength and protection." The vague, unscripted edition was met with sentimental applause. At the star-studded after-party, Sophia was the queen of the ball. Champagne flowed. Congratulations were showered upon her. She was a perfect, smiling machine of social grace. "Sophia, you look stunning." "Congratulations," a rising starlet named Scarlett Reed gushed, sidling up to her. "So that Jack Wilder, was he really your bodyguard? He's so lucky, landing that Cinderfall role. Do you have his number? I'm looking for a new action coach." The casual, predatory interest in Scarlett's eyes was a tiny, sharp needle against Sophia's composure. "I'm not aware of his professional schedule," Sophia said coolly. "You should contact his agent." She turned to Ava. "I need some air." She escaped to the rooftop terrace. The cool night air was a relief. She leaned against the railing, trying to quell the frantic, nameless anxiety in her chest. A muffled giggle from the terrace entrance made her turn. There, framed in the doorway, stood two people. One was Scarlett Reed, blushing and hopeful. The other was a man in a perfectly tailored black suit. His back was to her, but the broad shoulders, the confident stillness, it was unmistakable. Jack! Sophia's heart stopped. He was here. When did he get back? And why was he talking to Scarlett? She could just make out Scarlett's voice, trembling with nervous adoration. "I've had a crush on you ever since you were on the Ghost Line set. Could you? Give me a chance?" The wind died. Sophia held her breath. "We say yes?" He was a free man now, a rising star. He could have anyone. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, Jack took a small step back, creating distance between himself and Scarlett. His voice carried on the night air, polite but edged with steel. "I'm sorry, Ms. Reed. Thank you, but I'm already in love with someone." Scarlett paled. "Ooh," she whispered. Jack didn't answer her. Instead, his eyes lifted and found Sophia's across the terrace. Sophia froze, pinned by his gaze. He excused himself from the heartbroken Scarlett and started walking toward her. Each step was a deliberate, resonant thud that echoed the frantic beating of her own heart. He stopped a foot away, his presence overwhelming. He pulled out his phone. The screen's glow illuminated the hard line of his jaw. He swiped once, then turned the screen to face her. It was a copy of their contract. His finger was pointing to one bolded clause. 4. Prohibitions. During the term of the contract, the second party is prohibited from engaging in any romantic or sexual relationships. His eyes, burning with an intensity she had never seen, locked onto hers. His voice was a low, rough murmur that shattered her world. "The contract says I'm not allowed to fall in love, boss." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "The contract's almost up. Can I file for breach of contract now?" #7. The unraveling of pride. The heart's gambit the air on the terrace crackled. Jack's question, loaded with 3 years of unspoken emotion, slammed into Sophia with the force of a physical blow. Her mind went blank, her pride screaming for retreat. "You're drunk," she managed to say, her voice a thin, brittle thread. It was a pathetic defense, and they both knew it. She turned and fled, her gown a blur of midnight blue as she escaped back into the noisy, glittering ballroom, leaving him and his soul-bearing question behind in the cold night air. Back in the swirling chaos of the party, she put her mask back on. She laughed, she schmoozed, she toasted her victory, a perfect porcelain doll of a movie star. Only the white-knuckled grip on her champagne flute betrayed the storm raging inside her. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost," Ava muttered, pulling her aside. "It was nothing," Sophia lied, forcing a smile. "Just ran into Jack." She spent the rest of the night in a haze, the question echoing in her mind. Can I file for breach of contract now? Back in her silent, empty penthouse, she let the gown fall to the floor. She sank onto the cold marble, leaning against the vast window overlooking the city. The contract's cold print, the smell of his burning skin, the feel of his hands guiding her through a fight sequence, the image of him silently folding his cheap clothes. Every memory she had carefully categorized as a transaction came flooding back, shattering her defenses, drowning her pride. The next day, she was at a press event, her exhaustion hidden under a heavy layer of makeup. After, Mia handed her a small, unmarked velvet box. "Someone dropped this off for you." Her heart leaped. Inside, there was no note, just a neatly folded, faded blue and white checkered handkerchief. She remembered it instantly. It was the one she had grabbed from her purse and pressed to his acid burn that day on set. She'd forgotten all about it, but he had kept it, washed it, saved it. She clutched the soft fabric, a tangible piece of his quiet devotion, and felt a tremor run through her. Just then, Ava rushed in, her face grim. "We have a problem. A smear campaign just hit the gossip blogs." They're claiming you stole your first big role, that you sabotage other actors. It's trending on Twitter. Before Sophia could even process the attack, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The posts are down. The source has been dealt with. Don't worry. It was signed with a single letter, J. She looked at her tablet. The trending topic had vanished. The attack had been neutralized with silent, devastating efficiency. He hadn't called, hadn't asked for thanks. He had simply protected her. Again, later that afternoon, during a televised interview, the journalist smiled slyly. We actually spoke to Jack Wilder yesterday. He mentioned that his career turned a corner thanks to a certain benefactor on the Ghost Line set who gave him a crucial opportunity. Any idea who he might have been talking about? Sophia's breath caught. She managed a deflective answer about the director, but her mind was reeling. A benefactor? In love with someone? The handkerchief, the erased smear campaign, his words. It was a coordinated, overwhelming assault on her heart. Her phone buzzed again. It was him. I know what you're afraid of. Losing control. The gap between us. The contract. I signed it because I had to survive. But I'm not here to collect a debt. Sophia, I'm here to see if you're brave enough to admit you lost. To admit you need me. The way I need you. The red carpet for the Ghost Line premiere was a river of crimson flowing toward the Grand Theater. The roar of the crowd and the blinding strobes of the paparazzi created a vortex of chaotic energy. This was Sophia's first major appearance since winning her award, and the world was watching. In her dressing room, Sophia stared at her reflection. She was wearing a breathtaking, fire engine red gown, a warrior queen in couture. But beneath the armor of her perfect makeup, her heart was racing. Jack's last text was a declaration of war on her pride. Admit you need me. For Sophia Sinclair, that was the hardest thing in the world. She stepped onto the carpet. The sound was deafening. She smiled. She posed. She waved, a master of her craft. At the interview podium, the host, after the usual gushing, went in for the kill. Sophia, you are positively glowing tonight. The fans are dying to know. Is there a new romance behind that glow? The crowd held its collective breath. The pre-approved answer, I'm focusing on my career, was on the tip of her tongue. But then she thought of the handkerchief, the silent protection, the raw vulnerability in his eyes on the terrace. The years of him standing as her shield. She needed him, not as a tool, as Jack. Her practiced smile faltered. Her eyes lifted, looking past the host, past the cameras, searching the shadows of the far end of the carpet. And then, as if summoned by her gaze, a spotlight swung to the entrance of the carpet. A man emerged from the darkness. He was wearing a black velvet tuxedo that seemed to absorb the light, a stark, powerful contrast to her fiery red. He ignored the gasps and the frantic shouting of his name. He walked with a calm, deliberate purpose, his eyes fixed on one person and one person only. It was Jack. The world seemed to fall away as he walked toward her, a silent, magnetic force pulling the entire event into his orbit. He stopped beside her, his presence a solid, grounding warmth. She looked up at him. In his eyes, she saw it all. The fierce love, the unwavering certainty, the hope. In her own, he saw the surrender. The pride, finally crumbling to dust. In front of the entire world, Sophia Sinclair smiled. A real, brilliant, unscripted smile. She reached out and took his hand. Their fingers interlaced, a perfect fit. She turned back to the stunned host and the millions watching. Her voice, clear and strong, rang out over the pandemonium. I'd like you to meet someone, she said, her eyes shining as she looked at the man beside her. My husband, Jack Wilder. The world exploded. In the heart of the beautiful chaos, Jack leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. His voice was a low, possessive rumble, a promise that sealed their past and began their future. My turn to protect you. He paused, his grip tightening on her hand. For life. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment a contract born of desperation was reborn as a love story for the ages. The red carpet, once a path she walked alone, was now the beginning of a road they would walk together.